The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as tourists gathered around the imposing gates of Buckingham Palace. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a weathered man in his early 50s, whose calm demeanor and straight posture hinted at his military background. He wore a simple navy jacket over khaki pants, blending seamlessly with the other visitors who had come to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Royal Marines commando before retiring 5 years ago. These days, he worked as a security consultant for a private firm in London, but today was his day off. His daughter Emma had been pestering him for months to take her to see the Royal Guards, and he had finally given in to her enthusiastic requests. The 8-year-old girl bounced excitedly beside him, her blonde pigtails swaying as she craned her neck to get a better view of the guards in their iconic red tunics and black bearskin hats. "Dad, when do they start moving?" Emma whispered, tugging at his jacket sleeve. "Soon, sweetheart. Just be patient," Marcus replied, his eyes automatically scanning the crowd around them. Old habits died hard, and even in civilian life, he found himself constantly assessing his surroundings for potential threats. It was second nature after years of combat operations where situational awareness meant the difference between life and death. The crowd had grown considerably in the past hour. Families with children, elderly couples with cameras, and groups of international tourists all pressed closer to the palace railings. Street performers entertained the waiting masses while vendors sold Union Jack souvenirs and postcards. The atmosphere was festive and peaceful, exactly what Marcus had hoped for when planning this father-daughter outing. Near the front of the crowd, the Queen's Guard stood at attention in their traditional positions. These weren't just ceremonial soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. Marcus knew from his military background that each guard was a fully trained member of the British Army's Household Division, selected for their impeccable service records and unwavering discipline. They carried loaded rifles and were authorized to use force if necessary to protect the royal family and palace grounds. Sergeant James Morrison stood among his fellow guards, his face a mask of professional stoicism beneath the chin strap of his bearskin hat. At 28, he had already served 2 deployments in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan before being selected for this prestigious posting. The ceremony might look like mere pageantry to civilians, but Morrison understood the serious responsibility that came with guarding one of the most important buildings in the British Empire. As the crowd continued to swell, a disturbance began to develop near the back of the gathering. A man in his 30s with greasy hair and torn clothing was pushing aggressively through the families and tourists, muttering angrily under his breath. Danny Briggs had spent the night sleeping rough under a bridge after being kicked out of his latest temporary accommodation. His addiction to alcohol and various drugs had cost him his job, his family, and most recently his place to stay. The combination of withdrawal symptoms, sleep deprivation, and mounting frustration had left Danny in a volatile state. He had wandered into central London looking for an easy target to rob or some way to vent his growing rage. The sight of well-dressed families enjoying themselves while he suffered only intensified his anger. "Excuse me, you're pushing my daughter," a middle-aged woman said politely as Danny shoved past her family. "Shut up, lady!" Danny snarled, his bloodshot eyes scanning the crowd for someone who looked like they might have money or valuables worth taking. Marcus noticed the commotion before most others did. His military training had taught him to recognize the signs of someone looking for trouble. Danny's aggressive body language, the way his eyes darted around the crowd, and his obvious agitation all triggered warning bells in Marcus's mind. He gently moved Emma slightly behind him while keeping his attention on the developing situation. Danny's gaze eventually settled on an elderly Japanese couple who were taking photographs with an expensive-looking camera. They stood somewhat isolated from the main crowd, making them perfect targets in his drug-addled thinking. He began moving toward them with obvious predatory intent, pushing aside anyone who got in his way. "Sir, please watch where you're going," a father said as Danny knocked into his young son. "Mind your own business," Danny shot back, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. The disturbance was beginning to attract attention from other tourists. But most people simply tried to move away from the obvious troublemaker. However, Marcus found himself in a position where he could either intervene or watch innocent people potentially get hurt. His daughter looked up at him with concern as she noticed the tension in her father's posture. "Dad, what's wrong with that man?" Emma asked quietly. "Some people have problems that make them angry, sweetheart. Just stay close to me," Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving Danny's movements. As Danny approached the Japanese couple, his intentions became clearer. He was positioning himself for what looked like an attempt to snatch their camera or wallet. The elderly man was completely focused on taking pictures of the guards, while his wife consulted a guidebook, neither of them aware of the danger approaching from behind. Marcus made a decision. His military training and moral compass wouldn't allow him to stand by while innocent people were victimized. He began moving through the crowd, careful not to alarm his daughter while positioning himself to intervene if necessary. "Emma, I need you to stay right here for just a moment. Don't move from this spot," he instructed his daughter, pointing to a position near a family with several children. "But Dad—" "Trust me, sweetheart, I'll be right back." Danny was now within arm's reach of the Japanese couple. His hand moved toward the expensive camera hanging from the elderly man's neck. But before he could make his move, he felt a firm hand on his shoulder. "I think you're heading in the wrong direction, mate," Marcus said calmly but firmly. Danny spun around to face this unexpected interference, his eyes wild with a mixture of desperation and drug-fueled aggression. He took in Marcus's appearance quickly, middle-aged, well-dressed, probably carrying cash and credit cards. "Get your hands off me," Danny demanded, his voice rising to a shout that began attracting more attention from the surrounding crowd. "I'm not touching you," Marcus replied evenly, raising his hand slightly to show they were empty. "I'm just suggesting you might want to reconsider whatever you were planning." The confrontation was escalating rapidly. Danny's shouting had alerted several tourists who began backing away from the scene. Some started recording with their phones, sensing that something dramatic was about to unfold. The Japanese couple, finally aware of the disturbance behind them, moved quickly away from the aggressive stranger who had been approaching them. "You think you're some kind of hero?" Danny screamed, his face flushing red with anger. "Mind your own bloody business before I make you regret it." Marcus maintained his calm demeanor despite the verbal assault. Years of dealing with hostile situations in combat zones had taught him the importance of de-escalation whenever possible. However, he was also prepared for the possibility that this situation might turn violent. "Nobody wants any trouble here," Marcus said in a steady voice. "There are families and children around. Why don't you just walk away and we can all get back to enjoying our day?" But Danny was beyond reasoning. The combination of his chemical dependencies, mental instability, and growing desperation had pushed him past the point of rational thinking. He saw Marcus as just another obstacle standing between him and what he wanted. His hand moved to his jacket pocket where he kept a small knife that he had picked up weeks ago for protection on the streets. The crowd around them continued to grow as word of the confrontation spread through the gathered tourists. Parents pulled their children closer while others held up phones to record what was happening. The festive atmosphere of the morning had been replaced by tension and uncertainty. From his position with the Queen's Guard, Sergeant Morrison had also taken notice of the disturbance. While his primary responsibility was maintaining his post and the ceremonial formations, he was trained to assess potential threats to public safety and the security of the palace grounds. The situation was still contained within the crowd of tourists, but he remained alert and ready to respond if it escalated further. Danny's grip tightened on the knife in his pocket as he glared at Marcus with increasing hostility. In his disturbed state of mind, he had convinced himself that this interference was a personal attack on his already miserable existence. The voices of concerned tourists faded into background noise as his focus narrowed to the man standing between him and his intended targets. "Last warning," Danny hissed, pulling the small blade partially from his pocket so that Marcus could see the glint of metal. "Walk away now, or you'll regret getting involved." Marcus's expression didn't change, but his body language shifted almost imperceptibly. His weight balanced more evenly on both feet, his hands positioned where they could react quickly to sudden movement. He had faced far more dangerous opponents in Afghanistan, and while he hoped to resolve this peacefully, he was prepared for whatever might come next. The moment hung suspended like a held breath as dozens of tourists watched the confrontation unfold. Parents covered their children's eyes while others continued filming, unsure whether they were about to witness a tragic incident or hoping that cooler heads would prevail. Emma watched from her position near the other family, her young face filled with confusion and worry as she saw her father facing down an obviously dangerous man. She wanted to run to him, but something in his voice when he told her to stay put made her trust that he knew what he was doing. Danny's decision came suddenly and without warning. Whether driven by desperation, mental illness, or the chemical imbalance in his brain, he chose violence over retreat. With a wild scream of rage, he lunged forward with his knife extended, aiming for Marcus's chest in a clumsy but potentially deadly attack. Marcus's body reacted before his mind had fully processed the attack. Years of combat training took over as he sidestepped Danny's wild lunge, grabbing the attacker's wrist with his left hand while delivering a precise strike to the elbow joint with his right. The knife clattered to the cobblestones as Danny's arm went numb from the expertly applied pressure point technique. The entire sequence lasted less than 3 seconds. But to the watching crowd, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Gasps and screams erupted from the tourists as they witnessed the attempted stabbing and its swift resolution. Several people stumbled backward in their haste to get away from the violence, while others stood frozen in shock. Danny tried to swing his free arm at Marcus's head, but his movements were clumsy and telegraphed. Marcus ducked under the wild haymaker and swept Danny's legs, sending the attacker crashing to the ground. Before Danny could recover, Marcus had him face down with his arm twisted behind his back in a textbook restraint hold. "Stay down," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in dangerous situations. It's over. The transformation from peaceful tourist to efficient combatant had been so swift and complete that many onlookers struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Marcus hadn't raised his voice during the entire confrontation, hadn't shown any sign of anger or aggression. He had simply neutralized a threat with clinical precision. Sergeant Morrison and 2 other guards were already moving toward the scene, their ceremonial composure abandoned in favor of their training as soldiers. Morrison spoke rapidly into a concealed radio device, calling for backup and medical assistance, while his colleagues helped control the crowd. "Armed Metropolitan Police are en route," Morrison announced as he approached Marcus, who still held Danny pinned to the ground. "Well done, sir. Are you injured?" "I'm fine, Sergeant." "This one's going to need medical attention, though," Marcus replied, noting Danny's labored breathing and the way he had gone limp after the initial struggle. "Possible drug intoxication. Definitely withdrawal symptoms. He's been on the streets for a while by the look of him." Danny mumbled incoherently into the cobblestones, his earlier rage replaced by confusion and disorientation. The combination of whatever substances he had been using and the shock of being so thoroughly defeated had left him in a semi-conscious state. Emma broke free from the family Marcus had asked to watch her and ran toward her father. "Dad, Dad, are you okay?" she cried, tears streaming down her young face. Marcus looked up at his approaching daughter, and his expression immediately softened. "I'm all right, sweetheart. Everything's fine now," he assured her, while maintaining his hold on Danny. "Why don't you stay with Sergeant Morrison here until the police arrive?" Morrison nodded and gently guided Emma a safe distance away from the scene. "Your dad's a hero, young lady. He stopped a very bad man from hurting innocent people," the guard told her in a kind voice that contrasted sharply with his imposing appearance. The crowd had formed a wide circle around the incident, with dozens of phones pointed at the scene. Videos of the confrontation were already being uploaded to social media platforms, and within minutes, the footage would begin spreading across the internet. Local news crews would arrive within the hour, drawn by reports of violence at one of London's most famous landmarks. "Did you see how fast he moved?" one tourist whispered to her companion. "That guy with the knife didn't stand a chance." "He must be police or military," another onlooker speculated. "Normal people don't fight like that." Dr. Sarah Chen, an emergency room physician who had been visiting London with her family, pushed through the crowd with her medical bag. "I'm a doctor. Let me have a look at him," she announced, kneeling beside Danny's prone form. Marcus carefully adjusted his hold to allow Dr. Chen access while maintaining control of the subdued attacker. "Probable drug intoxication," he reported professionally. "No obvious injuries from the restraint, but he was exhibiting erratic behavior and signs of withdrawal before the incident." Dr. Chen quickly assessed Danny's condition, checking his pulse and breathing while examining his eyes for signs of drug use. "Looks like a combination of alcohol and possibly cocaine or methamphetamines," she diagnosed. "His vitals are stable but elevated. He needs proper medical evaluation." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as Metropolitan Police vehicles raced toward Buckingham Palace. Word of an armed attack at such a high-profile location had triggered an immediate emergency response from multiple agencies. Anti-terrorism units were being deployed as a precautionary measure until the full extent of the threat could be determined. Among the gathering crowd, tourists from various countries watched the unfolding drama with fascination. Many had never witnessed such an event firsthand, and the efficient way it had been resolved by both the veteran and the royal guards impressed visitors who often viewed such ceremonies as mere pageantry. "In my country, this would have ended very differently," commented Hans Weber, a German tourist who was recording the scene with his phone. "Your guards and this man, they handled it perfectly. No unnecessary violence, but very effective." A young American college student named Jessica Martinez had captured the entire incident on her phone and was already being contacted by news organizations who had seen her footage online. "I was just trying to get a good video of the changing of the guard," she explained to a reporter who had called her. "I never expected to film something like this." Marcus continued to hold Danny securely while answering questions from Sergeant Morrison about the sequence of events. His military background had taught him the importance of accurate reporting, and he provided a clear, factual account of what had transpired. "Subject approached elderly tourists with apparent intent to rob or assault," Marcus reported. "When confronted, he became agitated and produced a small knife. He initiated the attack by lunging with the weapon. I defended myself using minimal necessary force to neutralize the threat." "Any idea what triggered his behavior?" Morrison asked while keeping watch for the approaching police units. "Could be anything with someone in his condition," Marcus replied. "Desperation, mental illness, drug-induced paranoia. He's been living rough for a while. Probably saw an opportunity and took it without thinking it through." Emma had calmed down somewhat while standing next to Sergeant Morrison, but she kept glancing anxiously at her father. The 8-year-old had seen her dad in action before during his work as a security consultant, but witnessing him defend against a knife attack was something entirely different. "Is the bad man going to be okay?" she asked Morrison with the innocent concern that children often show even for those who have done wrong. "He'll be fine, love. Your father made sure not to hurt him more than necessary," Morrison assured her. "Sometimes adults make very poor choices, especially when they're sick or confused." The important thing is that no innocent people got hurt today. The first police vehicles arrived with a screech of tires and flashing lights. Armed officers immediately secured the perimeter, while plainclothes detectives began interviewing witnesses. The highly trained Metropolitan Police Tactical Team quickly assessed the situation and determined that the threat had been contained. Inspector Michael Davies, a 20-year veteran of the force, took charge of the scene. He approached Marcus with professional curiosity, noting the way the civilian had maintained control of the situation without escalating the violence unnecessarily. "Sir, I'm Inspector Davies. I understand you subdued an armed attacker?" Davies inquired while signaling for paramedics to attend to Danny. "That's correct, Inspector. Former Royal Marines Commando. Currently working private security," Marcus replied, finally releasing Danny into police custody. "I intervened when I observed him targeting innocent tourists for what appeared to be robbery or assault." Davies nodded approvingly. "Your military record shows, sir. Textbook restraint technique, minimal force applied. We'll need a full statement, but from what I can see here, you likely prevented several people from being seriously injured." As paramedics loaded Danny onto a stretcher, he began to regain some coherence. His eyes darted around wildly as he tried to understand how he had gone from attacking someone to being arrested. The reality of his situation slowly penetrated through the chemical haze clouding his thoughts. "I didn't mean to hurt nobody," Danny mumbled as the medical team checked his vital signs. "I just needed some money. I ain't eaten in 2 days." Dr. Chen, who had remained to assist the paramedics, looked at Danny with professional sympathy rather than judgment. "He needs detox and psychiatric evaluation," she told Inspector Davies. "Whatever substances he's been using, combined with malnutrition and sleep deprivation, have clearly compromised his judgment." The incident had transformed the peaceful morning gathering into a complex crime scene investigation. Tourists who had come to see a ceremonial changing of the guard found themselves providing witness statements to police officers. The contrast between the pageantry they had expected and the real-world violence they had witnessed left many visitors shaken but impressed by the professionalism of everyone involved. Social media was already buzzing with clips and commentary about the incident. The hashtag Buckingham Palace Hero began trending as people shared and discussed the footage of Marcus's swift intervention. News organizations around the world picked up the story, fascinated by the intersection of ceremonial tradition and modern urban violence. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself at the center of unwanted attention as reporters and tourists alike sought to interview the man who had prevented what could have been a tragic incident. He deflected most questions while providing the necessary information to the investigating officers. "I just did what anyone with the training should do," Marcus told a persistent journalist. "There were families with children present. Someone had to act." As the immediate chaos began to settle, Sergeant Morrison approached Marcus with a mixture of professional respect and personal gratitude. "Sir, on behalf of the Queen's Guard and the British Army, I want to thank you for your actions today. You upheld the finest traditions of military service, even in civilian life." The formal recognition from a fellow soldier meant more to Marcus than any media attention or public praise. It represented the unspoken bond between those who had sworn to protect others, whether on foreign battlefields or busy London streets. 3 hours after the incident, Marcus finally found himself walking away from Buckingham Palace with Emma's small hand firmly gripped in his own. The police had completed their initial interviews, and Inspector Davies had assured him that no charges would be filed against him. In fact, the Metropolitan Police were considering recommending him for a civilian commendation for his intervention. "Dad, why did that man want to hurt people?" Emma asked as they made their way toward the tube station. The excitement and fear of the morning's events had left her with many questions that her 8-year-old mind struggled to process. Marcus considered his response carefully. He had always tried to be honest with his daughter while presenting difficult topics in age-appropriate ways. "Sometimes people get so desperate and confused that they stop thinking clearly," he explained. "That man was sick and hadn't eaten for days. When people are that desperate, they sometimes make very bad choices." "But you stopped him before he could hurt anyone," Emma observed with the simple logic of childhood. "You're like a superhero." "Dad, I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. I just used the training that the military gave me to protect people. That's what soldiers are supposed to do, even when they're not soldiers anymore," Marcus replied, squeezing her hand gently. The story of the incident had already spread far beyond the immediate scene. News outlets across Britain were reporting on the Buckingham Palace hero, while international media picked up the story as an example of how military veterans continued to serve their communities even after leaving active duty. The dramatic footage captured by multiple tourists had been viewed millions of times across various social media platforms. Back at the palace, Sergeant Morrison and his fellow guards had resumed their ceremonial duties, but the morning's events had reinforced their understanding of the real security responsibilities that came with their positions. The incident would become part of their ongoing training discussions about threat assessment and civilian protection. Dr. Chen had accompanied Danny to the hospital, where initial tests confirmed her assessment of multiple drug intoxication combined with severe malnutrition and dehydration. The psychiatric evaluation would take several days, but preliminary findings suggested that Danny was suffering from substance-induced psychosis, complicated by underlying mental health issues. "He's going to need long-term treatment," Dr. Chen explained to the social worker assigned to Danny's case. "The drug abuse is just a symptom of deeper problems. Without proper intervention, he'll likely end up back on the streets within weeks." Inspector Davies had seen too many cases like Danny's during his career. London's growing population of homeless individuals struggling with addiction and mental illness created situations like this with depressing regularity. However, he was struck by how differently this incident had ended compared to similar confrontations he had investigated. "If that veteran hadn't been there, we could have been dealing with multiple casualties," Davies told his sergeant as they reviewed witness statements. "The way he handled it probably saved lives while minimizing harm to the perpetrator. That's textbook professional intervention." The Japanese couple that Danny had originally targeted, Hiroshi and Akiko Tanaka, had been deeply shaken by their close encounter with violence. However, they had made a point of finding Marcus before he left the scene to express their gratitude through a police translator. "In Japan, we have great respect for those who protect others at personal risk," Hiroshi had told Marcus through the interpreter. "Your courage today exemplifies the best of British character. We will remember this kindness forever." By evening, the story had reached the desk of Colonel James Harrison, Marcus's former commanding officer in the Royal Marines. Harrison had been following his former subordinate's transition to civilian life and felt a surge of pride when he saw the news coverage of the incident. "That's the Marcus Thompson I remember," Harrison told his adjutant. "Always put the mission and the safety of others before his own concerns. The Corps trained him well, but what he did today came from his character, not just his military skills." The broader veteran community had also taken notice of the incident. Online forums dedicated to former military personnel were filled with discussions about Marcus's actions and the ongoing responsibilities that came with military training. Many veterans shared their own stories of intervening in civilian emergencies, highlighting the positive impact that former service members continued to have in their communities. Emma's school friends would spend the next week bombarding her with questions about her father's newfound celebrity status. The 8-year-old handled the attention with the same calm demeanor that Marcus had displayed during the incident itself, proudly telling anyone who would listen that her dad was a hero who protected people. At the hospital, Danny slowly began to emerge from his drug-induced haze as medical staff worked to stabilize his condition. The withdrawal process would be difficult, but for the first time in months, he was receiving proper nutrition and medical care. When he was finally lucid enough to understand what had happened, his reaction surprised the attending psychiatrist. "That man I tried to stab," Danny asked during a counseling session. "Is he all right? Did I hurt him?" "The gentleman who stopped you wasn't injured," Dr. Patricia Wells informed him. "In fact, he made sure you received proper medical attention. He could have seriously hurt you in defending himself, but he chose to use only the minimum force necessary." Danny stared at the ceiling of his hospital room, struggling to reconcile his memories of the incident with this information. In his experience, confrontations with authority figures or Good Samaritans usually ended with him being beaten or brutalized. The fact that someone had shown restraint while protecting others challenged his worldview about human nature. "Why didn't he hurt me more?" Danny asked quietly. "I came at him with a knife. Most people would have..." "Some people understand that violence should only be used as a last resort and only to the extent necessary to stop a threat," Dr. Wells explained. "The man who stopped you is a former soldier. He's trained to protect people, not to seek revenge or inflict unnecessary harm." The incident had also prompted discussions within the Metropolitan Police about the value of military veterans in civilian security roles. Many officers recognized that Marcus's training and experience had prevented what could have become a much more serious situation requiring armed police intervention. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Buckingham Palace. He was being invited to a private ceremony where he would receive a commendation from senior palace officials for his actions in protecting tourists and assisting the Queen's Guard in maintaining public safety. "Will I get to meet the Queen?" Emma asked excitedly when her father told her about the invitation. "Probably not the Queen herself, but we'll get to visit the palace properly this time," Marcus replied with a smile. "Though I suspect the ceremony will be much quieter than our last visit." The story of Danny Briggs took a more positive turn than many similar cases. The combination of proper medical treatment, psychiatric care, and intervention from social services had connected him with resources that addressed his underlying problems rather than just treating the symptoms. 6 months later, he would be clean, housed, and working with a veterans support organization to help other homeless individuals struggling with addiction. In an ironic twist, Danny would eventually learn that Marcus was a veteran himself, which helped explain the restraint and professionalism he had shown during their confrontation. The revelation would motivate Danny to seek out other veterans organizations and would become a turning point in his recovery journey. The incident at Buckingham Palace became a case study in several military and law enforcement training programs, illustrating the importance of proportional response and the ongoing value of military training in civilian contexts. Video footage of Marcus's intervention was used to teach courses on de-escalation, civilian protection, and the ethical use of force. For Marcus himself, the attention gradually died down as the news cycle moved on to other stories. He returned to his work as a security consultant, though he found himself fielding numerous job offers from organizations impressed by his handling of the situation. His reputation in the industry had been significantly enhanced by the public demonstration of his skills and judgment. Emma eventually got her proper tour of Buckingham Palace during the commendation ceremony, complete with a personal meeting with some of the Queen's Guard who had been present during the incident. The guards, now in their dress uniforms rather than ceremonial gear, took time to explain their dual roles as both ceremonial figures and active soldiers. The story became a reminder that heroism often comes not from seeking glory or recognition, but from ordinary people choosing to act when circumstances demand it. Marcus's military training had given him the skills to intervene effectively, but his decision to get involved in the first place came from his character and his commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Years later, when Emma was older and better able to understand the complexities of what had happened that morning, She would realize that her father's actions represented more than just stopping a single criminal. In an age of increasing social disconnection and urban anonymity, Marcus had demonstrated that some people still felt a responsibility to look out for their fellow citizens, regardless of personal risk or inconvenience. The incident also highlighted the often invisible struggles of individuals like Danny, whose mental health and addiction issues had led them to desperate acts. While the immediate focus had been on preventing violence and protecting the innocent, the longer-term lesson was about the importance of addressing the root causes that created such situations in the first place. The morning that began as a simple father-daughter outing to see the changing of the guard had ended up touching dozens of lives in unexpected ways. For Marcus and Emma, it became a defining moment that would influence how they viewed civic responsibility and the importance of standing up for others. For the Queen's Guard, it reinforced their understanding of their role as protectors as well as ceremonial figures. For Danny, it became the beginning of a long journey toward recovery and redemption. Most importantly, it served as a reminder that in an uncertain world, there were still people willing to risk their own safety to protect strangers, whether they wore uniforms or not.